So you probably heard about recent events in Vancouver where a man drove a vehicle into a crowd of people at a Filipino festival. There are, of course, calls, as there always are, for greater mental health supports, which there won't be because mental health supports are expensive. Both psychologists and psychiatrists are expensive. Plus, they always ask questions about your fucked up childhood that force people to acknowledge that maybe harming your kids a little less than your parents harmed you isn't the bar that you should be aiming for. Beyond that, mental illness is a scary thing to experience. The people that you trust the most aren't qualified to provide meaningful help. And oftentimes, they'll tell you that you should see somebody rather than offering to help get you in touch with a professional themselves. Fun fact, if you have ever tried to help someone in a crisis get in touch with mental health professionals, it's not easy. And it's very easy for the person in crisis to simply become overwhelmed and give up on getting help until they feel better, in which case they'll probably then believe that they no longer need help. I once had a psychiatrist explain it to me this way. You need to have a general practitioner or a GP or family doctor, and you need to remember that GPs are kind of dumb. So you need to give them breadcrumbs. You need to tell them in one visit that you're feeling down. Then you book another visit later and you tell them that you're feeling worse. By the third visit, they may get the idea that you might be depressed. If not, tell them, I think I might be depressed. I asked him, but what if they give me pills that I don't feel comfortable taking? What if I just need time off of work without getting fired so that I can regroup? He said that just because someone gives you a prescription doesn't mean that you have to take the pills. Now, obviously, some conditions, particularly if you're working with an actual psychiatrist, are different. Certain conditions, you definitely are much better off with pills. Some, you might just need to change your circumstances. But given that today is election day in Canada, I do want to touch on how the politicians running to be prime minister reacted to this event. We're going to start from most narcissistic to least. Starting, of course, with Pierre presenting as if he had empathy, who spoke at a Filipino church in Ontario. What he said was the same sort of thing that you expect any politician to say in these situations, though he did have this awkward nugget where he thanked them for welcoming him into their sanctuary, which, if you're not familiar with church stuff, the sanctuary is the room where the congregation gathers for the service. Now, there may be some idiosyncrasy that I'm not familiar with specific to Filipino church culture, but typically you would thank someone for welcoming you into their church. If you wanted to focus on the people, you could say congregation, though realistically, church actually refers to the congregation more so than the building, though those outside of Christianity may often think of church as the church building. But thanking someone for welcoming you into their sanctuary is kind of like thanking someone for welcoming you into their living room rather than their home. Kind of like calling it 2 Corinthians instead of 2 Corinthians. You would think that someone who's courting the Christo-fascist vote would bother to learn a little bit more about evangelical Christianity. Later that day, he didn't even bother to give lip service to what happened at his rallies. The closest he got was complaining about people in Vancouver who'd had multiple interactions with the police, which I've made other videos talking about why that rhetoric is disingenuous. Jagmeet Singh spoke with reporters on the 26th, and then again at a vigil, where on one hand he did offer a number of empathetic statements where he acknowledged what happened was a tragedy, which, yes, that is an appropriate way to describe an event where 11 people senselessly lose their lives. But he then pivots into talking about how the NDP's platform includes more mental health resources. And I'm not saying that you can't talk about policy while people are mourning, but I wouldn't ever recommend doing it this way. In fairness to Jagmeet, however, he had been at the festival the previous day, so there is a chance that he may have been in some degree of shock. So I don't want to hammer on him too hard for this, but generally, really the only time that it's appropriate to talk about policy in a tragedy is when you're outraged and, especially in situations where perhaps there were laws in place to prevent something, but then someone repealed them because, they were paid money by industry groups. And then, so in those situations, if you've got righteous anger about it and, it's coming from a really emotional place of frustration, that may resonate with people. But talking about mental health resources when generally no government bothers to fund mental health resources properly, it rings a little bit hollow. Really, there should have been someone on his team who could have helped him deal with this Because when you're a politician and you're talking about an event like this, you're talking to two primary groups of people. You're talking to the people who were directly affected by the tragedy, who they're very shaken, they feel very unsafe. There's also the people who may not have been directly involved, but may, for example, in this case, just be Filipino people living in another city in Canada. They may feel very directly affected and they may feel unsafe. So, on the one hand, you are speaking to those people, but on the other hand, you're also speaking to a much larger audience who may, like, they know that when X number of people die in any situation, that's bad. But at the same time, we hear all the time about certain numbers of people dying, often at the hands of different governments across the world. And we don't all break down in tears every time that happens because, well, on some level, we definitely understand that that's wrong, that it shouldn't happen. We don't let it hit our emotional core because otherwise we would never get anything done. And nothing is really served by us feeling awful because, too many countries have elected awful leaders who are fine with casually ending people's lives. So, how did Carney do? He did participate in a rally in Edmonton, which I assume had already been scheduled for a while. So, in that instance, do you outright cancel or do you go through with it? I expect if the rally had been in Vancouver, it would have been canceled, but he went through with it, though I do credit him for, in basically his opening remarks, commenting on what happened in Vancouver and acknowledging that, which is basically what people expect politicians to do. But things change as the day goes on. After his time in Edmonton, he does travel to Vancouver where he attends a service at a church and lays some flowers. He also meets with people in the local Filipino community, but he doesn't ever speak to the press during these times. The speaking he does is while shaking hands with individuals, and the media simply are not a priority for him at that moment. If the media want a soundbite, they can get it from his comments earlier at the rally. Canada doesn't need to hear more from him, and I have my doubts that anyone in the Filipino community was hoping to have more political talk about what they were experiencing. I don't know the man. He may simply have some of the best political advisors out there, but I hope this is just him understanding what's necessary and what isn't, because in this situation, less is more. Politicians are often rewarded, particularly by the media, for doing, and relentlessly talking. The media is always ready to have another news story where politicians said this. Now let's have 5 people talk about that. I can't say for sure that I'll love him the whole time he's in office. I'm sure he'll do things that annoy me in the future, but this was, to me anyway, it felt very appropriate. By the way, I probably do have a bit more training in this sort of thing than the lawyer, the banker, and he's just a politician. So if you're someone who is feeling overwhelmed with feelings because of these events, and they did connect with you on an emotional level, I'm going to ask you to be kind to yourself. You might have a lot planned for today, and you may feel like lots of people are relying on you. If you tell them that you just need to do less today, that's okay. You may feel so awful that you can't imagine ever feeling okay again. Or you may also feel like you should feel worse, like there's something wrong with you for not collapsing to the floor in grief against a door in a dimly lit room, sobbing while the camera pans around you. Grief is personal and does not need to be performative. Also, not everything hits everyone the same way. So I hope you can be gracious towards people who you may encounter who you feel should feel more or less about these events. Grief has stages. And when we experience jarring events, sometimes we want to rush through to the end, and sometimes we may want to simply stop and stay in sorrow and feel that it's wrong to move out of the first stages. If you're wanting to rush through to feeling something different, though, it may be tempting to engage with alcohol, but I'm going to ask that you avoid it. Your brain needs to do certain things to move this experience into long-term memory and to let you emotionally move on from it in a healthy manner, and alcohol does not help that process. It is a depressant, and in the long run, it will only make you feel worse. If you feel tempted to camp out in your sorrow, maybe eventually ask yourself who that's for. Would any of those who lost their lives or who were injured want you to be sad for forever? It's unlikely. Most people at the end of the day prefer people around them be happy, and those who don't, Well, we can pretend that they're better in death than they were in life. Sorrow and mourning is ultimately for you, not for those who are no longer with us. They demand no sacrifice or tribute. They reap no benefit from your sadness. And eventually, if you let yourself cry as much as you need to, and then start enjoying sunsets again, then you can start enjoying the happy memories you had together. And remembering the happiness that you shared with someone is one of the kindest things that you can do with their memory. And remember, talking with people can be very good for you. But if someone feels a need to give you advice constantly, it's okay to excuse yourself. Nobody has the right answer for you because they're not you. There are universal principles to grief, however, and if you're having trouble working through your grief, a therapist can help. Friends may care a great deal about you, but one of the best things about a therapist is that because you or your benefits through work or wherever are paying for them, you get somebody who is trained to not try and tell you what to do. Because most people don't do what their friends tell them to do, because the doing is only part of it. All that a therapist does is talk to you and ask you questions that help you understand what you're going through, and any solutions you have at the end of the session are going to come from you, not from them. And when they come from you, they're more likely to work.